Okay, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the 3-pass method. I call it here the 3-pass hack, which is a way of going through a lot of different journal articles and doing sort of a quick read on them. So remember that you're going to have to go through papers for a lot of reasons, to check them out for a conference or class, to, stay up to date in your field, to kind of get the hang of a new intervention or model because you're working with a client who has a new problem that you haven't dealt with before. As a strong user of research in your social work practice, you will typically spend a ton of hours every year just reading papers. Getting the hang of reading a paper efficiently is super important, but it's actually something that's not typically taught in school. I'm going to just go over some of the ways that I've found work for me. These are some of the approaches, and I'm going to start with this one. There are a couple of other approaches that I've used, particularly in terms of note-taking, that I'll talk about later, but what I want you to be able to do is to try some of these things so that you're not just doing, a lot of, being on your own with a lot of trial and error and trying to figure things out on your own. So, so here's the scoop. This is the 3-pass method, 3-pass approach, and we're going to talk about how you can do it to sort of survey the literature overall. Instead of just diving into a paper from the beginning and just sort of powering through the end, I want you to try breaking it up into 3 different passes at reading the paper. And each pass has its own goals and builds on what you've already gathered. So the first pass, this is like a warm-up. You're not trying to become an expert just yet. The goal is to get a rough idea of what the paper is about. The second time you read through it, you're going to dig a bit deeper. This pass is all about sort of getting the hang of what the paper's saying, but you're not sweating the tiny details just yet. And then the third pass is when you really dive deeply into trying to understand what the paper is saying inside and out. So first up, you've got the paper in front of you, and you're going to do sort of like a speedy run through. You're just giving the paper a once over from, up high, bird's eye view. And this is when you figure out if you want to dive in more or not. So this should be quick, about 5 to 10 minutes tops. Here's how you do it. The first is that you want to take a good look at the title, the abstract, and the intro to the paper, just to sort of get the gist of the paper. Then you want to check out the section and subsection headings. Don't sweat the details in between. Just check them out, become familiar with them. And then you want to jump over to the conclusion section and see, how they wrapped things up in the paper. And you want to, of course, glance over the references as well and mentally tick off the ones you're already familiar with. So by the time you finish that quick initial run through, the first pass, you should be able to tackle what we call the 5 C's. The first is the category of it. What's the format or type of paper? Is this all about findings from original study? Is it breaking down an existing theoretical approach and applying it to methods? Or is it about, showing off a new intervention model and talking about how it can be tested? What's the type of paper that this is? The second is context. Who's this paper, hanging out with in the research literature? Who's it responding to? What theories is it using to tackle the problem? If you had to group this with other papers, where would you group it? The third C is correctness. So are the assumptions that the author is making, are they actually on point, or are they totally off base? Fourth, you want to think about contributions. What's this paper bringing to the table? What are its big takeaways? How does it add to the emerging discussion about whatever this topic is about? And lastly is clarity. Did the author do a good job of writing this up, or is it all just sort of jumbled and confusing? Now at this point, you've spent a couple of minutes finding the article and downloading it as a PDF. Then you've spent 5 to 10 minutes scanning it. You've spent a couple of minutes now thinking about it, sort of reflecting on what you've read. So, maybe you've spent tops like 15 minutes on this paper, and you need to use this information that you have so far to choose whether you want to read further. And you might decide at this point, hey, this isn't a required article. I don't have to read this. So I'm not going to read further. The paper doesn't interest me. I don't know enough about the area to understand the paper. The authors are making invalid assumptions. The first pass is really adequate for things that aren't in your research area, but, might someday prove relevant, so you know that they exist, but you aren't necessarily diving into them totally deeply. When you write a paper, just FYI, you can expect most reviewers and readers to make only one pass over it. So you want to be careful about choosing coherent sections and subsection titles and writing concise, comprehensive abstracts that really reflect the content of your paper, because if a reviewer or professor who's grading it can't understand the gist after one pass, if you're trying to get the paper published, it's likely to be rejected. And, if a reader can't understand the highlights of the paper after 5 minutes, they're, likely to, not finish reading it, or, to put it down, or to just skim the rest of it and then put it to the side and not care about it anymore. And that's not what you want. So remember that this first look is going to be handy when it comes to papers that aren't exactly in your research playground, but might come in handy down the road. And you are now at this point deciding whether or not you want to read more of this paper. So let's imagine that you decide, okay, it's worth my time to read more. So in the second pass, you're going to read the paper with a little bit more care, but you're going to still ignore details like, proofs or statistical tests or the exact demographics of the study population. It helps at this point if you want to jot down some of the key points on like a sticky note or in the margin or something, to make comments in the margin as you read, if it's on paper. You want to look carefully at things like figures, diagrams, other illustrations in the paper, and think about, like, do they illustrate important findings? What are the findings? Can I understand how these findings relate to the model or the theoretical premise or the context that the researcher brought up in the beginning part in the introduction when they were talking about why they wrote the paper? Remember that you also can, at this point, mark relevant, resources that you haven't read yet for future reading to say, like, oh, this person cited this person. I want to go back and find that article and read it. This is a good way in general to learn about the background of the paper anyway. This second pass takes, for an experienced reader, about a half an hour, and for a beginner at your stage in graduate school, could probably take up to an hour. So after this pass, you should be able to sort of grasp the content of the paper. You should be able to summarize the main thrust of the paper with supporting evidence to somebody else. This level of detail that you've been looking at is appropriate for the kind of paper that you're interested in, because maybe it fills a course requirement and it's something that you're thinking about maybe exploring at some point. But if you're not writing a paper about it, you might at this point stop with the second pass. Sometimes you don't understand a paper even at the end of the second pass. It might be because the subject matter is new to you, or, it has unfamiliar terminology or acronyms, or, the authors use a statistical test or an experimental technique that you don't understand. So, like, most of the paper is incomprehensible to you. The paper could be poorly written with, assertions that are unsubstantiated, or a lot of forward references. Or it could just be like, okay, it's late at night, I'm tired, At this point, you can choose to either keep reading and go on to the third pass. You can set the paper aside and hope that you don't need to understand the material to be successful in your career and to finish your degree program. You can return to the paper later, maybe after reading some more background material. Or you can just say, I'm going to persevere. I don't fully understand this, but I'm going to go ahead and go on to the third pass. So at the end of this second pass, whether you're going forward or not, you should just generally be able to summarize what is the article saying, why is it saying this, you know, what did the researchers ask, how did they answer this, how does this fit into sort of a larger conversation, and any kind of maybe implications about what the researchers found. Okay, so let's imagine that you've decided to persevere. You're going on now to the third pass. And this third final pass is particularly important if you're using this as a key source, like in a literature review, or, you know, as theoretical underpinnings for your conceptual paper or something like that. You don't fully understand a paper until you get to the third pass. The key to the third pass is to attempt to sort of virtually in your head recreate the paper. So re-implement the paper. So make this, to be able to identify the assumptions that the authors made, make those same assumptions, recreate the work in your head, and then compare this recreation that you've structured in your head from your memory of multiple times of reading this, compare this to the actual paper. And using this, you can easily identify, you know, what the paper's innovations were, you know, what were their key findings, what were the like, wow kind of things about it, but also like sort of what are the hidden failings or assumptions that the paper is making. So on this third pass of reading through, you're reading slowly, you're paying a lot of attention to detail. You want to identify and challenge every assumption in every statement. Is there evidence for everything that they are saying is true? You should think about how you yourself would present a particular idea or concept, and then compare the actual way that they did it with the virtual way that you're imagining in your head of how you might do it, or your memory of how they did it. This is going to help you find insights into the presentation techniques in the article, the research methods, the way that they approach the problem, and also in general will add to your repertoire of, you know, tools as a consumer and user of and critiquer of research. So during this pass, you want to also jot down ideas for future work. This pass can take about an hour for an experienced reader. For a less experienced reader, this can take a couple of hours. I mean, I've had students who've said it takes 4 to 5 hours, the very, you know, like in their first semester of grad school, to do this kind of a reading. At the end of this pass, you should be able to sort of reconstruct the entire structure of the article from memory. You should be able to identify its strong and weak points, and in particular, you should be able to pinpoint the implicit assumptions, the missing citations to relevant work, the potential issues with experimental or analytical techniques. What ideas or preconceived notions did the researchers come to this with, assuming that they could prove, or that would be shown through this, or that, you know, what did they think the outcomes of this would mean, and did they actually achieve that, those goals? So your paper reading skills are really put to the test when you're doing a literature review or a larger term paper. This is going to require you to read sometimes tens of papers, sometimes in an unfamiliar field. And a lot of the time students are wondering at this point, okay, now, you know, in a syllabus, you're given a list of papers you have to read, but now I'm being told, write a paper about my own thing, whatever my own thing is, my own topic. So now I have to find my own papers. So what papers, you know, should I read? What should I look at? You can use this 3-pass approach to help you guide that process. So first, you want to use an academic search engine like Google Scholar or the library search site, and you want to pick some well-chosen keywords to find 3 to 5 recent papers in this area. So be specific with your keywords. And you're going to do sort of one pass on each paper to get a sense of the work of how papers that cover this topic are related to each other, you know, to sort of have a sense of what people are looking at and why. You want to identify key researchers during this process, people that are being cited a lot, maybe get a thumbnail summary of their recent work, or you know, if you're lucky at this point, you might get a pointer to a recent literature review paper, like a systematic review, or a meta-analysis, or like a comprehensive literature review. And if you can find such a paper, then you might be done. You know, you read the lit review, congratulating yourself on your good luck, and that's it. But let's imagine you don't find a literature review, or the literature reviews you find don't really tackle the exact question you're trying to tackle, or they aren't related enough that they're really fully helpful. So then you're going to move on. You're going to move on to this next step. You're going to find shared citations and repeated author names in the bibliographies of these authors. So look for people who are repeatedly cited over and over again. If they have been cited in multiple papers, you know, you've identified now 3 to 5 papers. So if you find an author that's cited in, you know, 4 of those 5 papers, or all 3 of those papers, that's an author that you want to put down their name and look them up. You want to look for, you're looking for key areas of research, key terms or ideas or concepts or interventions or models or frameworks that they're using, and key researchers in those areas. And you want to be specific. So you want to download, as you're looking at these, download any key papers that seem really relevant, or seminal works that you've identified now. So let's say you identify that Brown et al. Has written, you know, 6 different papers on this, you know, topic A. Then you're going to go find those 6 papers, and as many of them as you can get for free online, you know, using the library website, you're going to download them. Then you're going to go to their websites, the websites of the key researchers, and see what else they published recently. That's going to help you identify other things you need to look at, maybe conferences in the field where the best researchers usually publish, or other recent works, or compilations or anthologies or special issues of journal articles that focus on this particular topic. And these papers, along with the ones you set aside earlier and did the first pass on, these are going to like constitute the first version of your survey of the literature. You're going to make 2 passes with these papers. If they all cite a key paper that you didn't find earlier, you want to get it and read it. And then you go through this as an iterative process as much as you need to, until you've sort of built your own little collection of articles about this topic that you're looking at. And then, of course, you're going to read these articles using the 3-pass approach that we talked about at the beginning. That's it for now. I know that some of you probably want to go into this in greater detail, and we'll have the opportunity to later, but I wanted to just give you a quick overview of this approach to reading lots of research articles at one time. So I hope that's helpful, and if you have any questions, let me know.